Chainsaw Man Part 2 begins on July 13th, 2022, which is probably just a few days away by the time I get this video out, and we still don't know anything about how the story will turn out. No information has been given on the subject other than an interview with Fujimoto himself for BFM TV, thank you Jerome Lachasse, where he says, "I know exactly what I want to do, but I can't reveal anything to you. I want the reader to discover this second part without any information." In view of this total lack of information about the sequel, I'd like to take you on a little tour of what I imagine will be in Chainsaw Man Part 2. To begin with, I think we need to keep one thing in mind. Fujimoto is capable of anything. You might suspect that he's the kind of writer who always wants to do something different every time, never staying in a kind of comfort zone. So it's worth bearing in mind that Chainsaw Man Part 2 can really go in any direction. We could very well have a slice of life of Denji in high school, with almost no fighting and some romance. We could have a big 10-year ellipse with a big mess where we'll have to figure out how we got there. Or we could change our point of view altogether and follow another main character. Maybe Denji will get hit by a truck in Chapter 1, die and be reincarnated as an isekai. In short, I think you really have to assume that anything can happen. But if we go for a more classic sequel, there's a whole host of things I can imagine happening. Now that he's realized that an ordinary life wouldn't satisfy him, and that he's become the Chainsaw Man in order to have an extraordinary life, as I said in my analysis video on Denji, he's going to have to come to terms with this choice and juggle his ordinary life as a high school student with his extraordinary life as a superhero. First of all, Denji is going to learn a lot of new things as a high school student. For the first time in his life, he'll be confronted with a normal universe and we'll probably see him fall in love, get a girlfriend or something. I can imagine a lot of chapters in the slice of life mode that Fujimoto is so good at, and even some romance. And on the superhero side, knowing Fujimoto's propensity for hijacking codes or treating them in a realistic or even cynical way, as he did in Part 1 with Neketsu Shonen codes, I can see him doing the same with superhero codes. Maybe we'll be able to see things like the weight imposed by people's expectations, maybe even their selfishness a little, or their ingratitude. I'm thinking in general of films like Hancock for those who know, a really cool Will Smith movie, where he plays a superhero hated by the population because he can't save people without creating even more damage. In short, Denji is going to have to take on the role of superhero, but I'm not sure he has the shoulders to fill it as well as the people who admire him would like. Maybe we'll see him try to fit into this superhero role and lose himself a little. In any case, there's a lot to be said for all this. Then there's his relationship with Nayuta. As I said in the video on 17, 21 and 22/26, I can see a relationship similar to that between the Nayuta in Fujimoto's one-shot and her big brother developing between Denji and Nayuta, bearing in mind that the Nayuta in Chainsaw Man is as much a constant danger as the one in the one-shot, since she's the domination devil. In short, we're going to see Denji take on the role of big brother and have to take care of the walking disaster that serves as his little sister, and that promises a lot of fun, even contradicting the expectations that people will have of him as a superhero, with a bit of dilemmas like choosing between Nayuta and the rest of the world. There's also the story of the search for the Blood Devil. As a reminder, Denji made a contract with Power to find the Blood Devil and become his buddy again. I'm not sure if the contract is really a literal one, but I think Denji will do it anyway, which by the way, could lead to us going back to hell for a bit. It could be really interesting, I think. And while we're on the subject of Season 1 characters, we can also talk about Yoshida, a very mysterious character who I talked about a little in the video on the Hell arc, and where this is the only moment in the manga where he appears, who we know is a high school student and extremely powerful and intelligent since he fought Quanchi, the strongest of the devil hunters, and understood quite quickly that Makima's plans weren't clear. I can see him going to high school with Denji and building a friendship, rivalry with him, or even being an enemy, who knows. There are quite a few aspects of Chainsaw Man's lore that haven't been exploited yet either, like the demons of primary fears other than the Darkness Devil, although given their immense power I'm not sure we'll be seeing too much of them again, or really in extreme situations like the passage through hell in Part 1. But apart from that, Fujimoto's devil concept is so brilliant that you can really imagine anything with it. So there's still a lot to tell, and of course it'll make for some very stylish potential combat. As I was saying earlier, I think we'll have a lot of slice of life parts, but I suspect we'll also have fights and a lot of death as usual with lots of drama. If I have one piece of advice to give you, it's not to get too attached to the characters. But you should have understood that by now with Fujimoto. And we know very well that we'll fall into the trap again. In fact, I'm almost wondering if Denji isn't going to die himself. Fujimoto would be capable of it. So be prepared psychologically, I'm going to remain suspicious all the way through. On the other hand, there's one character I really don't see dying, Kobeni. I'm sure she'll find herself in all the worst possible situations and still miraculously pull through. 90% of the cast will die, but she won't. You don't know how, but she'll manage to survive. I wonder how Kishibe will be treated too. I can see him as a secret agent who runs things a bit behind the scenes and makes sure Denji lives well. He cares a lot about Denji, despite his depressive nonchalant looks. Also, there's one point to take into account that I find very positive. The fact that Chainsaw Man is published on Jump Plus gives Fujimoto even more freedom than he had before. So we'll surely be able to have even trashier stuff, whether in terms of violence, sex, or even themes in general, as we saw in Fire Punch, for example. There's been no announcement on the format of these chapters either, but I hope it'll be as free as possible, in the sense that it would be nice if he didn't have to do 20-page chapters on a weekly basis. Because on Jump Plus, the format is supposed to be pretty free since it's only distributed on the internet and there's no magazine to print. I'd like to see it run on a monthly basis, with 45 pages a month like manga, like Shingeki no Kyojin for example, because I think that's much better both in terms of pace, with longer chapters to build things up, and in terms of working conditions. With deadlines less difficult to meet, the quality of the drawings and narration inevitably increases, while reducing the author's workload. In my opinion, there's a good chance he'll have to stick to the classic weekly rhythm, but you never know. There's also the question of the overall vision of the work, of Chainsaw Man as a whole. Has he planned to bring Chainsaw Man to a definitive end with this part 2, or has he also planned a possible part 3, or even more? There's no way of knowing, but if that's the case, maybe he's going to set up a whole bunch of elements to prepare for the sequel, or just improvise like Araki might do with his different JoJo's parts, and go for different stuff each time. And while I'm on the subject, there's also the question of the length of part 2. How many volumes will we have? Personally, I think we'll only have about 10, as with part 1 and its 11 volumes. After all, Fujimoto doesn't seem to like the rhythm of weekly issues, and said in an interview that every time he drew a one-shot, he wanted to do a weekly, and every time he did a weekly, he wanted to do a one-shot. All this to say that I can't see him publishing the same manga for very long. After all, it only took him 2 years to do Chainsaw Man, and he only came back a year and a half later for part 2, in the meantime doing 2 big one-shots and a short story of 20 pages as a scriptwriter just recently. Just listen to the song, it came out recently and I recommend it. It reads in 2 seconds and it's quite funny, while carrying a little message about the over-interpretation of works that people can make. I felt a bit targeted, I admit. So, unless he decides to take a break in the middle of publishing part 2 to do some one-shots, or really forces himself to continue, I can't see Chainsaw Man part 2 going beyond 15 volumes. That's about all I've got to say, but I'd still like to add a little something. Fujimoto set the bar so high with part 1 that it's going to be hard to do better, or even just as well, with the same kind of story. After all, in view of his latest one-shots, I really do trust him 100%, but you've got to admit that the fact that he's had one big success after another, between Chainsaw Man, which has sold 13 million volumes, that is over 1 million per volume, all without anime, the fact that Look Back and Goodbye Eri have literally broken records on Manga Plus, with 3 and 2 million readings respectively in 24 hours, and finally the fact that there's huge expectations surrounding part 2 of CSM, all this must be putting enormous pressure on him, and I hope that everything goes well for him, and that he succeeds above all in telling us what he wants to tell us, even if it means thwarting our expectations and disappointing some of the public. We never say it enough, but an author must always tell what he wants to tell, not what the audience wants to be told. Anyway, that's all for this little video on what I'm expecting from Chainsaw Man Part 2. I'm really looking forward to seeing what it's going to be like, and I really think we'll all be more or less surprised by what's in store. Also, since a lot of people have asked me, I'm not going to do a chapter-by-chapter review of Chainsaw Man Part 2, except maybe for the first one, since it's the new one, because it would be too complicated to keep up the pace of one video a week while maintaining quality and continuing the other video projects I have on the side. Especially as there's often not enough material to make videos with just one chapter, so instead I'll be doing analyses at the end of each arc so that we'll have enough material to do good analyses and the pace will be easy for me to keep up, I hope. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, etc. And we'll meet again for the next video on Chainsaw Man, where this time we'll have the beginnings of answers to the questions I've just asked in this video. See you soon.